My name is Evelyn Parker, and I'm 72 years old. I live, or rather, I used to live, in a small two-story home on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina. The house was filled with memories of my late husband, George, whose laughter once echoed through every hallway. After his passing 8 years ago, that laughter faded, replaced by silence that only deepened with time. When my son, Michael, and his wife Claire suggested that I move in with them, I accepted with quiet gratitude. I told myself this would be a chance to heal, to be surrounded by family again. The one thing George had always wanted for me. I had imagined evenings filled with family dinners, shared laughter, and the comforting chaos of loved ones. But dreams rarely match reality. When I first moved in, I brought only a few boxes, photo albums, some books, and George's old sweater that still carried his faint scent. Michael helped me carry them upstairs, and I remember how he smiled that day. "Mom, you'll never be alone again," he said, and I believed him. For the first few weeks, things were peaceful. Claire was polite, and Michael seemed happy to have me around. I'd wake up early, make breakfast, and wait for them to join me. Sometimes we'd sit together, talk about old times, and for a brief moment, I felt at home. But slowly things began to change. The warmth in the air thinned out, and my presence started feeling more like a shadow than a comfort. Evenings grew quieter. Claire began spending more time upstairs. Michael stayed late at work, and the dinner table that once held conversation turned into a silent stage of distant eyes. I told myself they were just busy, that life had become too fast for long talks and family stories. But deep down, I could feel something shifting. A kind of invisible wall had risen between me and the world I thought I belonged to. Still, I held on to the hope that love, even if silent, still existed in small moments. In a smile, in a cup of tea left on the counter, in the sound of footsteps returning home. But those small moments began to vanish, one by one. And though I didn't want to admit it then, I could already feel the weight of loneliness pressing against my heart, reminding me that even in a house full of people, one can still be completely alone. Before all this, before the walls of my heart began to crack, I had lived a life of endless work and quiet resilience. After George's death, I had no one to rely on but myself. I worked as a nurse at St. Mary's Community Hospital, often pulling double shifts to make sure Michael and Sophie, my daughter, never went to bed hungry. There were nights I came home exhausted, my legs trembling, yet I'd still cook dinner, help them with homework, and whisper prayers over their sleeping heads. I didn't have much, but I had them, my reason to keep going. George had been a kind man, steady and gentle, but illness took him too soon. His absence left me hollow, but I knew falling apart wasn't an option. The bills kept coming, the children kept growing, and life, cruel as it can be, never stopped to ask if I was ready. I remember standing in the hospital cafeteria one night, staring at a paycheck that barely covered rent and groceries. I could have cried, but instead I smiled. Because for me, love was sacrifice, and sacrifice was love. Michael was always ambitious. He wanted to study business, to make something big of himself. Sophie, on the other hand, had George's softness, a nurturing soul who dreamed of becoming a teacher. Every dollar I saved went toward their education. I wore the same pair of shoes for years, mended the same coat every winter, and skipped meals so they could eat better. I didn't complain. When you're a mother, you don't count the cost of love. You just give. When Michael graduated and landed a job in the city, he hugged me so tightly I thought my heart would burst, with pride. "I'll take care of you, Mom. Always," he promised. I believed him without hesitation. Sophie married a kind man named Ryan and moved to Denver, but she called me every week, her voice always filled with warmth. My children were my greatest success, my life's proudest creation. That's why, years later, when Michael asked me to move in, I thought it was life's way of returning. Some of that love I never imagined the same home I helped build, through tears, sweat, and endless prayers, would one day be the place that broke me the most. Michael had grown into a man of comfort, confident, sharp, and successful. He worked as a financial consultant in town and owned a beautiful home on the edge of Blue Ridge Parkway, surrounded by maple trees that blushed red every fall. His wife, Claire, worked as a real estate agent, the kind of woman who spoke in clipped tones and smiled without warmth. They were a modern couple, always busy, always in control. Sophie, on the other hand, had built a small but happy life in Denver, Colorado, with her husband Ryan and their little girl, Lily. She called me every Sunday, always asking, "Mum, are you eating well? Is Michael being nice to you?" I'd laugh and say, "Of course, sweetheart. Don't worry about me." I never wanted her to know how lonely I truly felt. At first, living with Michael wasn't hard. We had our routines: morning coffee, short chats, and the occasional family outing. But slowly, his warmth faded. Work stress, I told myself. Maybe he was just tired. But then I started noticing little things. The way he avoided sitting near me on the couch. The sighs when I'd ask simple questions. The way he'd close his door when I watched old movies too loud. Claire was polite, but distant. She'd compliment me when friends were around. "Evelyn makes the best pies." But once they left, she'd return to her phone, scrolling endlessly. I often heard her say things like, "Your mum means well, but she's set in her ways." Or, "We need to have our own space someday." I pretended not to hear, but every word left a bruise. Sophie could sense something from miles away. "Mum, are you happy there?" she'd ask. I'd pause, take a deep breath, and answer, "Yes, honey, I'm fine." Because that's what mothers do. They protect their children, even from the truth. But the truth was that I felt like a guest in my son's home, a stranger moving carefully through her own family's life, trying not to take up too much space. I had traded solitude for suffocation. The first cracks began subtly. Small gestures, unspoken sighs, glances that lingered too long. One morning I made pancakes, just like I used to when Michael was little. When I called him down for breakfast, he came halfway down the stairs, checked his watch, and said, "I'll grab something on the way to work." I stood there holding the spatula, the smell of warm butter and syrup filling the air, and suddenly the kitchen felt colder than ever. Claire started rearranging things in the house, quietly moving my belongings into the guest room closet. "Just to make space?" she said, with a smile. My photo frames disappeared from the living room shelves, replaced by new ones. Glossy, perfect, and soulless. I didn't argue. I simply nodded and told myself that peace sometimes means silence. But silence can be cruel. Meals became shorter, conversations became thinner. I began to hear them whisper at night when they thought I was asleep. Once, I overheard Claire say, "She's sweet, but we can't keep doing this forever." My hands trembled as I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering how love could vanish so quietly. I tried to help, folding laundry, watering plants, cooking dinner, but every effort felt like an intrusion. "Mom, relax, we've got it," Michael would say, not realizing how much those words hurt. He was kind in tone, but distant in heart. I missed the boy who used to hold my hand while crossing the street, the one who promised to never leave me behind. I found myself speaking less. I started eating alone, spending afternoons in my room, watching old shows to drown the loneliness. The home that once felt like a promise now felt like a waiting room, waiting for something to end. One evening, I overheard them arguing quietly in the kitchen. "She's been here for years, Michael," Claire said, her voice sharp. "We need to start thinking about our own lives." My heart sank as I pressed my back against the wall, listening in silence. Michael didn't defend me. He just said softly, "I know." The next morning, I noticed my favorite chair missing from the living room. "Oh," Claire said casually, "we donated it. It didn't match the new decor." I smiled weakly and nodded, though it felt like someone had erased a small piece of me. Soon after, they began discussing options at the dinner table: assisted living homes, senior communities, always in vague, polite terms, but the meaning was clear. "You'd make new friends there," Claire said one night, forcing a smile. I just looked down at my plate and whispered, "I already have a family." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael tried to justify it later. "Mum, it's not about pushing you away," he said, avoiding my eyes. "It's just, it might be easier for everyone." I wanted to scream, to remind him of every sleepless night, every meal skipped, every tear hidden behind a smile. But I didn't. Mothers don't fight for space in their children's hearts. They quietly step back when they're no longer wanted. That night, I sat by the window, watching the lights of Asheville flicker below. The city glowed beautifully, but inside me, something dimmed forever. I realized then that love, once neglected, doesn't fade. It freezes, and the colder it gets, the quieter you become. That night, everything changed for Evelyn. After dinner, as she cleared the table quietly, Michael leaned against the counter, his face tense, his tone sharp, yet hesitant. "Mum," he began, "we've been thinking maybe you'd be happier in a retirement home. You know, with people your own age, friends, activities, things like that." The words hit her like a stone to the heart. She froze mid-step, the plate trembling slightly in her hand. For a few seconds she didn't say anything, just stared at him, trying to see if this was some cruel joke, but Michael's eyes wouldn't meet hers. His wife stood beside him, arms folded, avoiding Evelyn's gaze as if she couldn't bear to watch. The air felt heavy, suffocating. "A retirement home," Evelyn repeated softly, her voice breaking in disbelief. "I thought this was my home, too." Michael sighed. "It's not like that, Mom. It's just, we need some space. You deserve comfort, care, and privacy." Each word was carefully chosen, but they all sounded rehearsed, emptied of love and filled with guilt. Evelyn felt her knees weaken. She had worked her entire life to make sure her children never lacked anything, and now, when all she wanted was company and warmth, she was being asked to leave. Her mind wandered to the countless nights she stayed awake for him, when he had fevers, heartbreaks, and failures. She remembered how he used to say, "Mum, you're my hero." Now the same boy stood in front of her, asking her to pack her life into a suitcase. Evelyn gave a faint smile, masking the pain rising inside her. "Of course, Michael," she said quietly, "if that's what you think is best." She placed the last dish in the sink and walked to her room. Behind the closed door, she pressed her trembling hands against her chest, feeling her heart crack in silence. That night, she didn't cry out loud. She just sat by the window, staring at the faint moonlight, whispering to herself, "You can't force love to stay where it no longer wants to be." The house was quiet when Evelyn made her decision. She waited until Michael and his wife had gone to bed, their laughter faintly echoing from the living room. She went to her small wooden drawer and took out an old photograph. Her late husband, smiling in his uniform, his eyes filled with pride. "You were right," she whispered softly to the photo. "People forget, even the ones we love most. But I can't stay where I'm not wanted." She folded a few clothes neatly into her suitcase. A sweater her husband had worn during their last Christmas together, her old rosary, and a few family pictures. Every item carried a story, a memory, a piece of her soul. As she zipped the suitcase, her eyes welled up, but she wiped her tears quickly. "No crying tonight," she said to herself, almost like a command. She placed her late husband's sweater on top, touching it gently before closing the bag. For one last time, she walked through the house, the kitchen where she made pancakes for Michael every Sunday, the living room where Sophie used to dance as a little girl, and the garden where her husband had planted daisies. Everything whispered goodbye. Before leaving her room, she wrote a short note and left it on the nightstand. "Please don't worry. I'll be fine, love, Mom." She looked around once more, inhaling deeply, then walked toward the front door. The air outside was cold but calm. She wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders and stepped into the night. Each step felt like a piece of her past fading behind her, replaced by a strange mix of pain and peace. Evelyn didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing. She couldn't stay where her presence had turned into a burden. When the morning came, Michael found the note on the counter. He picked it up casually at first, expecting a grocery list or reminder. But as his eyes scanned the words, his face went pale. "Please don't worry, I'll be fine. Love, Mum." His heart skipped a beat. "Sophie!" he shouted instinctively, before realizing she wasn't there. She lived miles away. His wife appeared from the hallway, sleepy and confused. "What's wrong?" she asked. Michael held up the note silently, his throat dry. "She's gone," he whispered. Panic rushed through him as he checked her room. The bed was neatly made, the wardrobe half empty, her suitcase missing. He found the framed photo of his father on the nightstand. Gone too. For the first time in years, the house felt eerily quiet, colder than usual. His wife tried to console him. Maybe she just needed space. She'll call. But Michael knew better. His mother was proud, deeply emotional, and fragile inside. If she had left, she wouldn't come back easily. He sat on her bed, clutching the note tightly, guilt sinking into his chest like lead. He remembered the way she had smiled last night. Gentle, too gentle. It wasn't the smile of someone angry. It was the smile of someone who had already accepted goodbye. Outside, the morning sun rose softly, but Michael couldn't feel its warmth. He looked around the house that suddenly seemed too large, too quiet, too empty. For the first time, he wondered if space was really what he wanted. Evelyn took a long bus ride out of Asheville that morning, heading toward the nearby town where she once worked during her nursing days. She had always loved helping children, and when she passed by a children's hospital, something stirred inside her heart. Without much thought, she walked in, introduced herself to the staff, and asked if they needed volunteers. The nurse at the reception looked surprised, but smiled warmly. "We always have room for kindness," she said. Within hours, Evelyn was reading bedtime stories to children in the recovery ward, her soft voice filling the room like music. The little ones, many fighting sickness with brave smiles, instantly bonded with her. They called her Grandma Evie. For the first time in months, Evelyn felt seen, needed, and loved again. The small room she rented nearby was modest, just a bed, a desk, and a window facing a playground. But to her, it was home. Every morning she'd make tea, write in her journal, and walk to the hospital, where tiny hands waited for her stories and hugs. She began to smile again, the kind of smile that came from purpose. Her sadness faded slowly, replaced by quiet fulfillment. Maybe, she thought, God took me away from where I wasn't needed to bring me where I was. She never spoke badly of her son. She still prayed for him every night, hoping that one day he'd understand that love isn't a burden. It's a blessing people forget too soon. Weeks passed, and the Parker household had changed. The silence grew unbearable. Michael began noticing the little things, the missing smell of coffee in the morning, the empty rocking chair by the porch, and the absence of gentle humming that used to fill the evenings. His wife, too, seemed restless. "It's strange," she admitted one night, staring at the untouched teapot. "The house feels empty without her. Michael didn't reply. The guilt was heavy now, creeping into every quiet moment. He tried calling Sophie, hoping their mother might have reached her. Sophie hadn't heard from her either. "You told her to move out, didn't you?" Sophie said bitterly over the phone. "I didn't mean it like that," Michael defended weakly, but deep down, he knew he had. One evening, as he passed by his mother's old room, he noticed the faint imprint of her slippers on the carpet, the faint smell of lavender still lingering. He sat on her bed, holding the small pillow she used, and for the first time in a long while, tears came. He realized too late that love isn't about convenience, it's about presence. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like her voice calling his name. Every breeze through the curtains reminded him of the warmth he had driven away. The home he thought needed space now felt painfully hollow, and no amount of comfort could fill the void his mother's love once did. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the call came. Michael was sipping his coffee, scrolling aimlessly through his phone, when the unknown number flashed on the screen. "Hello, this is Nurse Carol from St. Mary's Children's Hospital," said the voice on the other end. For a moment, Michael's mind went blank. The nurse continued softly, "Are you the son of Mrs. Evelyn Parker?" His heart sank. Yes, I am," he stammered, his voice trembling. There was a pause. "Sir, your mother collapsed earlier today while reading to the children. She's stable for now, but you should come as soon as possible." The cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor, but he barely noticed. His wife rushed in. "What happened?" He looked up, pale and shaking. "It's Mum. She's in the hospital." The drive to St. Mary's felt endless. Every red light was torture. Every second replayed the words he had said to her, about space, about the retirement home. He remembered her face that night, calm but broken, and guilt tore through him like a knife. When he reached the hospital, he spotted a nurse near the reception. "Evelyn Parker," he gasped. She nodded gently and guided him to a small ward at the end of the hall. The door creaked open, revealing Evelyn, fragile yet peaceful, resting in bed with an oxygen tube. Her face looked tired but serene, like someone who had finally found rest. Michael's eyes filled with tears. He walked closer, holding her hand gently. It felt cold, thinner than he remembered. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to turn back time, but the words stuck in his throat. All he could whisper was, "Mum, please, wake up." The nurse placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "She's been here for weeks, helping sick children. They adore her," she said softly. "She's been their light." Those words shattered what was left of his composure. His mother had been giving love where it was truly valued, while he had pushed it away. A few hours later, Sophie arrived from Denver, her eyes swollen from crying. She walked straight to the hospital room, saw their mother, and broke down. "How could this happen?" she whispered. Michael looked at her helplessly. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I just wanted her to have space." Sophie turned to him sharply, anger mixing with sorrow. "You didn't want space, Michael. You wanted freedom, from responsibility, from guilt, and now look what that cost you." She handed him a brown envelope she had received from the hospital's administration earlier. Inside was a copy of their mother's new will. Evelyn had donated her house, her savings, and all her belongings to St. Mary's Children's Hospital in memory of her late husband, Daniel Parker. There wasn't a single mention of her children, except one line. "My children already have the most precious gift I could ever give. My love. I only hope they one day understand its worth." Michael stared at the letter, his hands shaking. "She left everything," he whispered. Sophie nodded, wiping her tears. "And yet, she gave us more than we ever deserved." Just then, Nurse Carol entered, carrying a drawing made by one of the hospital's children, a picture of Evelyn surrounded by kids, titled Grandma Evie's Angels. Sophie clutched it to her chest, sobbing quietly. Michael looked at the walls around him, covered with thank you notes from children. Every word, every smile, every drawing reminded him how deeply his mother had touched lives beyond their home. For the first time, he realized her love was never meant to be confined to their family. It was meant to heal the world. Later that evening, Evelyn slowly opened her eyes. The room was dimly lit, and her breathing was shallow. She saw Michael sitting beside her, his eyes red from crying, his hands wrapped tightly around hers. "Mom," he said softly. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have let you go. I was selfish. She raised a weak hand, touching his cheek gently. "Shh, my boy," she whispered. "I forgave you long before you realized." Her voice was faint but full of peace. "You were just lost in life's noise. We all lose our way sometimes." Tears streamed down Michael's face as he leaned closer. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." Evelyn smiled faintly. "You're my son. Forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something that love gives freely." Sophie stood beside her brother, holding their mother's other hand. "We're here now, Mum," she whispered. "We'll take care of you." Evelyn's eyes softened. "No, sweetheart. You'll take care of each other. That's all I ever wanted." Her breathing slowed as she looked toward the window, where the evening sun cast a golden glow across the room. "Do you hear that?" she murmured weakly. "The children are laughing." Outside, faint laughter from the pediatric ward echoed through the corridor. "That's where I belong," she said softly, "among laughter and love." Her voice grew weaker. "Promise me, you'll live with kindness. Always." Michael squeezed her hand. "I promise, Mom. I'll make you proud." Evelyn smiled one last time, her eyes glistening. "You already have, my son. You just didn't know it yet." Her hand fell still in his, her face calm, as if she had drifted into a peaceful sleep. The next morning, the hospital chapel was filled with quiet sobs and soft hymns. Doctors, nurses, and dozens of children attended Evelyn's memorial. They brought handmade cards, flowers, and teddy bears, placing them gently near her framed photo. The picture showed Evelyn smiling warmly, holding a child's hand. The same smile that had brightened countless lives. Michael and Sophie stood near the altar, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love. Nurse Carol approached them, handing Michael a small journal. "She wanted you to have this," she said. It was Evelyn's diary. Inside were pages filled with her thoughts, about her days at the hospital, the children she helped, and even her hopes for her son and daughter. One entry caught Michael's eye. "If I can no longer give love at home, I will give it where it's needed most. Maybe one day they'll understand that love never runs out, it only changes direction." Reading those words broke him completely. Sophie placed her hand on his shoulder, and for the first time in years, they hugged, truly hugged. The hospital director announced the new Evelyn Parker Wing, funded by her donation, dedicated to supporting sick children and elderly volunteers. The audience clapped. But for Michael, the applause sounded distant. His mother had left more behind than money. She had left a legacy of compassion. As he walked through the children's ward afterward, little hands reached out, saying, "You're Grandma Evie's son, right?" He nodded, smiling through tears. "Yes, I am." Months passed, but Evelyn's presence never truly left. Michael began volunteering at St. Mary's every weekend, reading bedtime stories to the children just like his mother once did. At first, it was painful. Every book, every laugh reminded him of her. But soon it became healing. He found comfort in carrying on her work, in seeing the joy she had spread. Sophie, too, became part of the hospital's charity events, using her art to decorate the children's wing named after their mother. Together, they built something beautiful out of their guilt and grief, a continuation of Evelyn's love. One evening, as Michael finished reading a story, a little girl tugged his sleeve and said, "Grandma Evie used to say love is like sunlight. Even when clouds hide it, it's still there." Those words made him smile. He looked toward the hospital's garden, where a plaque read, "In loving memory of Evelyn Parker. Her love lives on here." Standing there, he felt the breeze against his face, soft and familiar, almost like his mother's touch. He whispered, "Thank you, Mum. You never really left." The moral became clear to him that day. Love doesn't die when someone is gone. It multiplies in the lives they've touched. And as he walked out of the hospital, the sunset bathed the sky in golden light, just the way Evelyn would have liked.